The phone rang at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, and by 9:52, my hands were shaking so bad I had to set my tea down before I dropped it. Not from bad news. From the kind of news that comes wrapped so tight in sweetness, you don't feel the string around your neck until later. "Ma, I'm getting married." That's how my son said it. No warning, no lead-up. Just a sentence dropped into a Tuesday, like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the thing I'd been praying for since he was 22 and still bringing home women who didn't stay past Christmas. I want you to understand something about me before I go any further. I raised that boy by myself in a 2-bedroom apartment off Simpson Road. Worked doubles at the hospital billing office until my feet forgot what it felt like not to hurt, and never once complained where he could hear me. Everything I did, so he wouldn't have to carry the same weight I carried. So when he told me he was getting married, I didn't hear a red flag. I heard a reward. My name is Charmaine Reddit, and for 61 years, I thought I knew my own son better than I knew my own hands. "Renard, baby, that's wonderful," I said, already standing up, already pacing my living room like the joy needed somewhere to go. "When do I meet her? When do I meet her people?" There was a pause. Just half a second. But I've raised a son long enough to know his pauses have weather in them. "Ma, it's not really that kind of thing yet. Her parents, they're older, set in their ways. They're not really up for a whole meet the family thing before the wedding." I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes out before you've decided if something's funny. "Renard, they're going to be at the wedding, aren't they?" "That's the thing," he said. "They're not really. They won't be up for all that. It's just easier if it stays small on their end for now. Now, before I go further, I want to know something. Comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one, and I want to know who's sitting with me for this." I let his words sit in my chest a moment. Something about their end didn't feel like a fact. It felt like a wall he was building, brick by brick, in real time, and asking me to admire the mortar work. Still, I trust my son. I raised him not to lie to me about things that mattered. "All right," I said slowly. "Whatever's easiest for everybody." "Thank you, Ma." Relief in his voice, thick as syrup. Then quieter, like it was an afterthought and not the reason he'd really called. "Oh, and there's going to be 2 of them. 2 weddings, kind of. A small courthouse thing first, just paperwork, nothing real. Then the actual wedding later, with everybody." "2 weddings? It's not a big deal, Ma. Just don't mention it to anybody yet, okay? Not even Auntie Ruth. I don't want it getting complicated before it needs to be." I said, "Okay." I said I wouldn't tell a soul. But I sat there long after we hung up, staring at my phone like it might explain itself, because something about the way he'd said "nothing real" made the back of my neck go cold. Like he wasn't just asking me to keep a secret. He was asking me to help him hide something. 3 weeks after that phone call, Renard came by the house on a Sunday, the way he used to when he was younger and needed something from me but wanted to soften me up first with a plate of food. I made him a plate anyway. Some habits don't unlearn themselves just because you've gotten wiser. He sat at my kitchen table, same seat he'd sat in since he was 7 years old, and I watched him check his phone twice before he'd even picked up his fork. That wasn't new. Renard has always kept one hand on whatever he didn't want me to see, even as a boy. I remember when he was maybe 9, 10 years old, telling his whole class our apartment had a pool. We didn't have a pool. We barely had air conditioning that worked past July. When his teacher mentioned it to me at a parent conference, I wanted to sink into the floor, but Renard just shrugged when I asked him about it later. "I just didn't want them thinking we were poor, Ma." We were poor. There wasn't a version of that truth I could soften for him, and I never tried to. But he tried to soften it for himself, over and over. In little ways I let go because I understood where they came from. A boy ashamed of a 2-bedroom apartment will tell you a lot of things that aren't true, and most of them are harmless. A pool that doesn't exist. A father who's traveling for work instead of just gone. Sneakers. He said his coach gave him for free, that I later found out he'd worked a whole summer washing cars to buy. Too proud to admit he wanted something bad enough to earn it quietly instead of just asking me. I used to tell myself those were just a child's lies. The kind that fade once a boy grows into a man who doesn't need to prove anything to a classroom full of 9-year-olds anymore. Watching him at my table that Sunday, phone turned face down the second I glanced over, I wondered for the first time whether they'd faded at all, or just gotten bigger rooms to live in. "You all right?" I asked him. "You've checked that phone about 4 times since you sat down." "It's nothing, Ma. Work stuff." Same voice from the courthouse conversation. Same syrup-thick reassurance. I let it go, the way I've let 100 small things go, because pressing my son never got me anywhere but a shorter visit. When he got up to use the bathroom, his phone lit up on the table. Not me looking for anything, I want to be clear. Just a notification, bright enough to catch my eye the way things do when you're sitting 3 feet from a screen. A photo preview. A woman, pretty, maybe late 20s, standing in front of what looked like a brick home with white columns. I don't know what made me pick it up. Maybe 20 years of watching my son turn his phone face down every time I got close to something. Maybe just a mother's hands moving faster than her manners. The photo was already open when I touched it, not password protected, thank God, or shame on me for trying. And on the back of what looked like a printed copy tucked in his phone case, in handwriting that wasn't his, was a name. A last name. One I'd never heard him say out loud, not once, in 3 weeks of talking about this wedding. I heard the bathroom door open down the hall, and I set the phone down exactly where I found it, my heart going harder than it had any business going over a photograph. But that name was already burned into me. I didn't sleep that night. Not the way sleep is supposed to work anyway. I lay there with my eyes closed, but my mind kept circling back to that name over and over, like a tongue worrying a chipped tooth. Jernigan. I got up before 6, made my coffee, and sat down at the little desk in my spare room with my laptop. The same one I use to pay my light bill and look up recipes I never end up making. My hands were steadier than my heart was. I typed the name into the search bar. Jernigan, Atlanta, Georgia. Now, some of you might not know this about me, but I moved out of Atlanta myself almost 8 years ago, after Renard got his own place, and I didn't need to be so close to the hospital anymore. I settled 2 hours south, in Macon, in a little brick house with a porch I actually sit on. Quieter, slower. The kind of place where nobody's business moves too fast for you to keep up with it. Which meant if I wanted to see this family with my own eyes, I'd have to go back. The search didn't take long. A Lucius Jernigan and a Thelma Jernigan, both associated with a home address in a neighborhood called Cascade Heights. A community Facebook page, mostly church events and yard sale flyers, showed a photo from a spring picnic, and there, second row, was the same woman from Renard's phone. Smiling. Comfortable. Standing next to an older man I guessed was her father, his arm around her shoulder the way a man holds something he's proud of. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They were real. That much at least was true. A real family. A real address. A real girl who looked happy in a photograph she didn't know I'd ever see. So why hadn't my son said their name once in 3 weeks? I could have called him. I want you to know that thought crossed my mind, picking up the phone and just asking him plainly, "Why haven't you told me her last name? Why can't I meet these people? What exactly is too old supposed to mean? But I've lived 61 years, and I've learned something about my son that took me a long time to admit. When Renard doesn't want you to see something, asking him about it just teaches him to hide it better. If something was wrong, I wouldn't find it in an answer he gave me over the phone. I'd find it in a room he didn't know I was standing in. I opened a new tab, my fingers moving before I'd fully decided anything, and searched bus routes from Macon to Atlanta. There was a 10:40 departure 2 days out, arriving a little after noon. I bought the ticket before I could talk myself out of it. I didn't tell Renard. I didn't tell my sister Ruth, even though she'd have had opinions running a mile a minute. I didn't even tell myself, not really, what I was hoping to find, because some part of me was still hoping I'd get there, and everything would look exactly like it should. A nice family, a happy girl, a reasonable explanation for all of it, waiting for me on a porch in Cascade Heights. But I packed a small bag that night anyway, the kind you pack when part of you already knows you might not like what you find. The bus pulled out of the Macon station a little after 10:40, and I sat by the window with my bag on my lap like it might try to leave without me if I let go of it. I want to tell you my mind was calm on that ride. It wasn't. Every mile marker that passed felt like a countdown to something I couldn't name yet, and more than once I caught myself rehearsing what I'd say if I got there, and it was nothing. If Lucius and Thelma Jernigan turned out to be exactly what that picnic photo promised, warm people, a happy daughter, and I'd have made this whole trip over a name my son simply hadn't gotten around to mentioning. I almost believed that story. I wanted to. About 40 minutes outside Atlanta, my phone buzzed in my lap, and I nearly dropped it seeing his name on the screen. Renard. Hey, Ma. You good? Haven't heard from you in a couple days. My thumb hovered over the reply for a long moment. 2 days ago, I would have told him I was going grocery shopping, going to Ruth's, going nowhere in particular. Now every word felt like it needed to be measured out with a spoon. Charmaine. I'm fine, baby. Just running some errands. Renard. All right, love you. Oh, don't forget what I said. Keep the two-wedding thing between us for now, okay? Larissa's parents are funny about people knowing their business too early. I read that name 3 times. Larissa. He'd never said it before. Not once in 3 weeks of phone calls had my son spoken his fiancée's first name out loud to me. And now, here it was, dropped casual as anything. 40 minutes from the house where I was about to meet her parents uninvited. I didn't answer him right away. I just sat there with the phone warm in my hand, watching the pine trees blur past the window, feeling something settle low and cold in my stomach that had nothing to do with the bus's air conditioning. Charmaine, love you too. That's all I sent back. It felt like the safest thing I owned. The bus rolled into the Atlanta station a little after noon, same as the schedule promised, and I took a cab the rest of the way because my legs didn't feel steady enough to trust to a bus transfer. Cascade Heights was quiet, in the way old, established neighborhoods are quiet. Big trees, brick homes, yards that had been tended by the same hands for 30 years. The kind of street that made you lower your voice without anybody telling you to. The cab let me out in front of a well-kept brick house with white columns, and my stomach dropped clean through the floor of that car because I recognized it immediately. It was the house from the photo. I stood on the sidewalk a good minute before I made myself walk up that path, gripping the strap of my bag like it was the only thing keeping my feet moving forward instead of back toward the cab. I thought about turning around. I thought about a dozen reasons this was foolish, none of which were strong enough to make my hand stop reaching for the doorbell. It rang somewhere deep in the house, warm and ordinary, and for a second I let myself hope nobody was home, that I could walk away and pretend I'd never come. Then I heard footsteps, unhurried and light, and the door opened to a woman maybe in her 60s, silver twisted through her hair, wearing the kind of easy, open smile you give a neighbor, not a stranger. "Well, hello there," she said, warm as anything. "Can I help you, sweetheart?" "I'm sorry to just show up like this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is Charmaine. I think our children might be about to be family." For a second, the woman's smile didn't move at all. Just a flicker of careful assessment. The kind of look you give someone standing on your porch when you don't yet know if they're selling something or bringing trouble. Her eyes went from my face to my hands, like she was deciding whether I was safe before she decided whether I was welcome. Then something in what I'd said settled, and the caution eased off her like a held breath let go. "Oh, is that right? Come in, come in. Don't stand out there in that heat. Lucius, come see who's here." I stepped into a living room that smelled like lemon polish and something baking, photographs lining the mantel, the kind of home that had 30 years of Sunday dinners baked into its walls. An older man came around the corner, tall, a little stooped, wire-frame glasses pushed up on his nose. "This is Charmaine," Thelma said. "She says our kids are getting married." Lucius's face opened into a smile that made my chest ache with guilt for the doubt I'd carried onto his porch. "Well, that's wonderful. We haven't had the pleasure of meeting Desmond's mother yet. Please, sit. I didn't move. The name sat in the room like something had cracked open beneath the floorboards. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Whose mother?" "Desmond's," Thelma said, a small frown flickering across her face. "Our Larissa's fiancé." I felt my own pulse in my ears. "My son's name is Renard," I said. "Renard Reddit." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it stretched itself out like it had all the time in the world to sit there and watch what it did to my face. I'm not familiar with that name," Lucius said slowly, glancing at his wife. "Thelma? Do you know a Renard?" Thelma shook her head, her frown deepening into something more careful now, more guarded. "No, baby. I don't believe so." My hands were already moving before my mind fully caught up with them, pulling out my phone, opening the photo I'd taken of that printed picture from Renard's case, the one with the handwriting on the back I hadn't been able to forget. "This man," I said, turning the screen toward them. "Is this the man your daughter's marrying?" Thelma leaned forward, adjusting her glasses, and I watched recognition settle over her face, plain as daylight. "Yes, that's him. That's Desmond." She looked back up at me, warmth returning, misplaced and innocent. "Where did you get this picture, sweetheart?" "It was on my son's phone." The room went quiet in a different way now. Lucius's easy posture straightened, something shifting behind his glasses. "I don't understand," Thelma said, and I heard the first thread of unease creep into her voice, the kind that comes from a woman used to things making sense. "Why would your son have a picture of our Larissa's fiancé?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't have an answer that made sense either. Not one I could say out loud without the whole room tilting sideways. "Because that's my son," I said quietly. "That's Renard. I don't know anyone named Desmond." Lucius took the phone gently from his wife's hand and studied the photo himself, his jaw tightening, some private calculation moving behind his eyes. "Charmaine," he said, careful, like he was choosing each word off a shelf. "I think there might be some confusion here. This is Desmond Yates. He's been engaged to our daughter for the better part of a year. We've known him ourselves for almost 3. I felt the floor of that pretty living room shift beneath me, though nothing in the room had actually moved. Thelma looked between the phone and my face, her confusion curdling slowly into something else, something closer to fear. "Wait," she said. "How do you know Desmond?" "I know Desmond," I said slowly, "because I'm his mother. Only I've never called him Desmond a day in his life. I know him as Renard." Thelma's hand came up to her collarbone, the way people touch themselves when they need to feel something solid. Lucius set my phone down on the coffee table, careful, like it might go off. "That's not possible," Thelma said, and there was an edge under the words now, something protective and sharp. "Desmond's mother passed when he was a boy. He told us that himself, sitting right there where you're standing." I felt that sentence land somewhere under my ribs. "I'm not dead, baby. I'm standing right here in your living room." "Then maybe you've got the wrong man," Thelma said. And I watched her decide, right in front of me, to be suspicious of me instead of the man her daughter was marrying. Her voice cooled several degrees. "Maybe you saw a picture that favors somebody. People do resemble each other." "Maybe we should just call him," Lucius said, phone already halfway out of his pocket. "Let him clear this up himself before we go believing the worst about a man who sat at our table for 3 years. "Call him then," I said quietly. "Ask him his mother's name. Ask him where she's buried." Lucius's thumb hovered over the screen, and something in his own certainty wavered enough that he didn't finish dialing. "Thelma." His voice was quiet, but it carried. He was still looking at the photo, and something in his face had gone very still. "This isn't a resemblance. Look at the scar on his eyebrow. Same one Desmond's got." Thelma looked at me now with something closer to fear than suspicion, like I was the one who'd brought trouble into her home instead of the man already circling it. "Why would you come here saying things like this?" she said. "About a man about to marry my daughter?" "Because 3 weeks ago, my son called and told me he was engaged," I said, keeping my voice level, though my hands weren't cooperating. "He wouldn't let me meet her family. Said y'all were too old. Said you wouldn't be up for it. I found a photo on his phone with your last name written on the back of it. I got on a bus not knowing what I'd find. I didn't come here to hurt anybody, Mrs. Jernigan. I came here because something's been sitting wrong with me for weeks, and now I'm standing in your living room finding out my son's got a whole different name in it." The room went quiet enough that I could hear a clock ticking somewhere down the hall. Lucius took his glasses off, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and I watched 30 years of good instincts fighting against what was sitting right in front of him. "He told us he grew up an orphan," Lucius said, quiet now. All the earlier warmth drained out of it. Bounced between relatives, worked his way up from nothing. Larissa fell for that as much as anything. A man who built himself from nothing, wanting to build something real with her. "That's not true," I said softly. "I raised that boy myself. He had a mother who loved him every day of his life." Thelma sat down slowly on the arm of the sofa, like her legs had stopped being reliable. "Then who is he?" she said, mostly to herself. "Who have we let into this family?" "He's been so good to us," she said, quieter now, almost pleading. "Helped Lucius with his eyes acting up. Drove me to my doctor's appointments. Just last month, he helped us sign some paperwork. Said it'd give us peace of mind before the wedding." She stopped. I watched the thought catch up with her, watched her face go pale in the late afternoon light. "Thelma," Lucius said carefully. "What paperwork?" Lucius disappeared down the hallway and came back a few minutes later with a manila folder, his hands not quite steady as he set it on the coffee table between us. "Desmond brought this by about 6 weeks ago," he said. "Told us it was just some estate planning. Said with the wedding coming, it'd give everybody peace of mind. Make sure things were in order in case anything happened to either of us. Thelma hadn't moved from the arm of the sofa. He made it sound so simple, she said, mostly to herself. Said Larissa was too busy with wedding things to be bothered with paperwork, and since he was going to be family anyway. She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't need to. I opened the folder and found myself looking at a document with more legal language in it than I had patience to untangle sitting in a stranger's living room with my hands still trembling. Power of attorney. Desmond Yates named as agent. Financial and property matters, it said. Broad and vague enough that I didn't fully understand what it meant, only that it meant something. I don't know what this gives him the right to do, I admitted. I'm not a lawyer, and neither are either of you, it sounds like. We trusted him, Lucius said quietly. That was the whole point. We didn't think we needed a lawyer to trust our own daughter's fiancé. I thought of my neighbor back in Macon, a woman named Odessa who'd worked in real estate closings for near 20 years, and who I'd sat next to in church long enough to trust with an honest question. I stepped out onto the porch and called her right there, my voice low, the Jernigans watching me through the window like I might be their only tether to solid ground. Odessa didn't waste time on hello. Charmaine, what's wrong? You sound strange. I told her, as plain as I could, what I was looking at. She was quiet a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone careful, the way people talk when they don't want to alarm you but can't lie to you either. A power of attorney like that can give somebody a whole lot of reach, Charmaine. Access to accounts, ability to sign on somebody's behalf, sometimes even property transfers, depending on how it's worded. But listen to me. There's usually one place that kind of authority runs into a wall. If somebody tries to refinance an owner-occupied home, most lenders still require the actual homeowner to show up in person and sign at the closing table. It's one of the few safeguards left specifically because POA abuse is so common. An agent can't just walk in and sign that away alone. I felt something in my chest loosen, just slightly. For the first time since I'd stepped onto that porch that morning. A door that hadn't closed all the way yet. I went back inside and told Lucius and Thelma what she'd said, watching some of the color come back into Lucius's face, the stiffness in his shoulders easing by a fraction. So, whatever he's planning, Lucius said slowly, he still needs us in a room somewhere, signing something ourselves. That's what she said, I told him. Lucius went quiet again, his jaw working like he was chewing on a memory. Come to think of it, he said, Desmond mentioned something a couple weeks back. Said he'd found us a great refinance rate on the house. Wanted us to lock it in before the wedding so we wouldn't be dealing with paperwork on our honeymoon minds. Said he'd already started the process. Thelma's eyes went wide. Lucius? When is that closing? I don't know when the closing is, Lucius said, already pushing himself up from the sofa. I don't even remember agreeing to a date. Desmond said he'd handle scheduling it around our calendars. That's the part that's sitting wrong with me, I said. Every step of this. He's the one handling it. Not you, not Thelma. Him. Thelma had gone very still on the arm of the sofa, her hands folded tight in her lap. Larissa set up that first meeting with him about the estate paperwork. She said slowly, like she was pulling the memory out from somewhere she didn't want to look. She's the one who said it'd be a load off our minds before the wedding. Said Desmond had a friend in the business who could walk us through it easy. And the refinance, Lucius said, his voice hardening. She mentioned that too. Said it'd free up a little cash for the wedding and the honeymoon both. And wasn't it convenient timing? I watched something pass between them, husband and wife. 30 years of trusting each other's instincts colliding now with the fact that their own daughter had been the one greasing every door this man walked through. She wouldn't, Thelma said. But it came out thin, unconvinced even to her own ears. She loves that man. Whatever else is going on here, our daughter loves him. Loving somebody, I said quietly, doesn't mean you didn't know what he was. Or it could mean exactly the opposite, Thelma said, quieter now, like she was arguing with herself as much as with me. Maybe she just believed him the same as we did. Maybe she was just as fooled, just handling things because that's what brides do, and none of it means what we're afraid it means. Nobody answered that right away. It was possible. It was also possible it wasn't, and the not knowing sat in the room heavier than either answer would have. Thelma's phone buzzed on the side table, and all three of us looked at it like it might bite. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and her face did something complicated. Relief and dread fighting for the same real estate. "It's Larissa," she said. "Hey, Mama, just checking in. Did Desmond stop by today? He said he might swing by to go over some last details before the closing." Thelma read it out loud, her voice flat, like reading it aloud might drain some of the danger out of the words. "She's asking about the closing," Lucius said, "like it's just an errand." "Don't answer her," I said, quicker than I meant to. "Not yet. Not till we know what we're dealing with." Thelma set the phone down like it had gone hot in her hand. Lucius stood and walked to a small writing desk in the corner of the living room, the kind every proud homeowner keeps for bills and correspondence, and started sorting through a stack of mail he'd clearly been meaning to get to for days. I watched his shoulders stiffen halfway through the pile. "Lucius," Thelma said. He didn't answer right away. He pulled a single envelope free, already opened, and read it once, then again, his jaw working slow like he was chewing on something too big to swallow whole. "It's from the lender," he said finally, confirming our closing appointment. "When?" I asked. He looked up at both of us, and whatever color had come back into his face during our earlier phone call drained back out of it entirely. "Friday," he said. 4 days from now." 4 days. I sat with that number pressing against my chest like a stone I couldn't put down. "We need to know who he really is," I said. "Not just that he lied about being an orphan. Who is Desmond Yates, if my son is Renard Reddit?" Thelma pulled her laptop from a drawer in the writing desk, her hands moving with the stiff determination of a woman who needed something to do with them besides shake. "I'm not much for computers," she admitted, "but Larissa showed me how to look things up before. Obituaries, records, that kind of thing. She was helping me trace my own mother's people last year." The irony of that sat bitter in the room, and none of us said it out loud. We typed the name into a record search together, her hands on the keyboard, my eyes on the screen, Lucius pacing behind us like a man walking off a leg cramp that wouldn't quit. The first results were nothing. Social media profiles for men with the same name in other states, an old clipping about a Little League game from the 90s. We tried adding South Carolina, since that was the only birthplace Desmond had ever mentioned, and got a stretch of nothing useful, half the records behind paywalls, half of them for a Desmond Yates who was still very much alive and posting fishing photos in Myrtle Beach. "Try it with Andre in the middle," I said, remembering something Lucius had let slip earlier, a middle name Desmond used on formal paperwork but rarely said out loud. That search stalled too until Thelma, frustrated, switched from a general search engine to a genealogy site Larissa had set up an account on months ago for the wedding. Building a family tree, she'd said, something sentimental to hang in the reception hall. She got caught up finishing her own side of it, Thelma added quietly. Kept saying she'd get to his branch after the wedding, once things slowed down. She never did. It took 2 more tries, narrowing the search by state and rough age range, before something finally surfaced. There, Thelma said, her voice dropping to almost nothing. A death record. Desmond Andre Yates, born in South Carolina, died in a car accident outside Charlotte, North Carolina, nearly a decade ago. I felt the air go thin in that pretty living room. That can't be him, Thelma said, though her voice had already given up arguing it. Look at the birth date, I said quietly, pointing at the screen. The date matched almost exactly what Desmond had told the Jernigans was his own. Lucius confirmed it from memory, his voice hollow now, all the fight drained out of it. He's using a dead man's name, Lucius said, a dead man's whole life. I thought of Renard at 19, telling me he'd found construction work in Charlotte. I hadn't thought about that city in years. Now it sat in my chest like something finally clicking into a lock it had been searching for the whole time. He was in Charlotte, I said slowly, around the same time. I didn't put it together till just now. Thelma looked at me, and for the first time since I'd walked through her door, something in her face softened toward me instead of away. This is bigger than any of us guessing at a computer screen, Lucius said finally. We need somebody who can get real answers, quiet and careful, without tipping him off. He was already reaching for his phone. I've got an old friend, Henrietta Odom, sang in the same choir 40 years ago. She's a civil rights attorney now, handled her share of fraud cases too. He dialed before either of us could answer, and I watched his face while it rang, praying right along with him that somebody could still get us ahead of Friday. Henrietta Odom arrived within the hour, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a leather folder under her arm, the kind of presence that made the whole room straighten up without anybody asking it to. Lucius told me the bones of it on the phone, she said, settling into the chair across from us, not wasting a single word on pleasantries. I want to see everything. The POA, the refinance letter, and whatever you found on that genealogy site. We laid it all out on the coffee table, like evidence at a trial nobody had asked to attend. Henrietta studied it in silence for a long stretch, occasionally making a small sound in her throat that gave nothing away. I made some calls on my way over, she said finally. I've got a contact in vital records I've used before on fraud cases. I asked her to pull everything tied to the name Desmond Andre Yates, both the death record and any subsequent filings. And? Thelma's voice had a tremor in it she wasn't bothering to hide anymore. There's a birth certificate on file, Henrietta said, issued about 9 years ago. Roughly 8 months after the death certificate you found last night was entered into the system. Different county from the one listed as his birthplace on the original record. Meaning what? Lucius said, though I could hear in his voice that he already understood and just needed someone else to say it plainly. Meaning it wasn't a simple walk-in, Henrietta said. My contact says the way it's structured, somebody first requested a certified copy of the original death certificate. That part's public enough. Anybody can order one with a name and rough date. From there, they'd have needed the deceased's social security number, which either came from something left behind, a lost wallet, old mail, or was pieced together from other filed records. Then the birth certificate request went through a different county clerk's office entirely, one that at the time was still cross-referencing death records by hand instead of through the state database. That gap is what let it slide through. It's not one lucky break. It's 3 or 4 small ones, stacked in the right order. Once you have a birth certificate, she went on, everything else follows easier. Social security card, license, credit history. He didn't just take a name. He built an entire legal identity on top of a man who can't object to any of it. I sat with that a moment, feeling something in my chest go cold and still. My son hadn't just told a lie. He'd erased a real man's death and worn what was left of his life like a coat. one careful stitch at a time. "This is enough, isn't it?" Thelma asked. "Enough to stop him?" Henrietta closed her folder, and something in the set of her jaw told me the answer before she said it. "It's enough to prove fraud, eventually, in front of the right judge," she said. "But proving it and stopping Friday's closing are two different clocks running at two different speeds. Once that refinance closes and the funds disperse, the money doesn't just sit waiting to be handed back. It moves, pays off debts, gets spent, gets hidden. Clawing it back after the fact means months, sometimes years of litigation. And even then, there's no guarantee you see all of it again." "So we have days," Lucius said quietly. "You have days," Henrietta confirmed, "to stop something before it happens, instead of years trying to undo it after it has." That's not a small difference. That's the only difference that matters right now. The room went quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before. Not shock this time, but the particular stillness of people realizing exactly how much weight was sitting on the next 96 hours. "Then we don't wait for Friday to come to us," I said. "We use it." "If we confront him now," Henrietta said, "he runs. Men who've built a life on borrowed paperwork know how to disappear. He's done it once already, near enough." "So what do we do?" Thelma asked. "Just let Friday happen?" "We let Friday happen," Henrietta said, "but not the way he thinks it will." She laid it out plain, the way I imagined she'd laid out plans in courtrooms for 30 years. No wasted words, no room for panic to creep back in. The closing would proceed exactly as scheduled. Lucius and Thelma would show up as expected, calm, unremarkable, giving no reason for Desmond to suspect anything had shifted beneath him. Henrietta would be present, introduced simply as a family friend, and the Jernigan's attorney reviewing the paperwork, which was true enough not to raise questions. She'd already made a call to a detective she'd worked with on a prior fraud case, laying the groundwork quietly so that if the evidence held up the way it looked like it would, there'd be someone with the authority to act the moment it mattered, not months later in a courtroom. "And what about Renard?" I asked. "Desmond, whatever he answers to." "He doesn't know we know," Henrietta said. "That's the only advantage we have left, and I intend to keep it that way until the moment it counts." I sat with that a long moment, feeling something twist quiet and sour in my stomach that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with being a mother. "I keep thinking," I said slowly, "that somewhere under all of this is still my son. However he ended up wearing a dead man's name, I raised him. I fed him. I sat up with him when he was sick. I loved him before he learned how to lie to me. Setting a trap for him feels like—" I stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence in front of two people whose own daughter sat on the other side of this same betrayal. "It feels like grief," Thelma said quietly, surprising me. "Getting ready to lose somebody you haven't lost yet." I nodded because she'd said it better than I could have. "You don't have to feel good about it to do what's right," Lucius said, not unkindly. "We don't feel good about it either. Larissa is still my daughter no matter what she's done in the middle of all this." We sat with that shared, uneasy weight a moment, four people bound together by two children who'd built something rotten out of love and shame in equal measure. My phone rang, cutting clean through the quiet, and I saw Larissa's name on the screen for the first time. A number I didn't recognize until it lit up with a caller ID that must have come from somewhere in her parents' contacts, synced across some family app I didn't fully understand. The room went still. Thelma's eyes went wide, silent panic passing between her and Lucius. I looked at Henrietta. She nodded once. "Steady. Answer it," she said quietly. "Just answer it normal." My hand wasn't quite steady when I pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello? Hi. Is this Charmaine?" The voice was young, careful, feeling its way across unfamiliar ground. "This is Larissa. I think we need to talk." "I'm listening," I said, stepping out onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed behind me so my voice wouldn't carry back into the living room. "My mom's been acting strange all afternoon," Larissa said. "And Desmond mentioned somebody came by the house today. A woman. He got quiet when he said it, and Desmond doesn't get quiet about things unless he's scared of them. You should ask him who he thinks I am," I said. "See what he tells you." "Why would I need to ask him that?" she said, quick, almost defensive. "I know exactly who my fiancé is." "Do you?" I said. "Because I'm his mother, and I don't know who Desmond is at all." The silence that followed was long enough to tell me she was choosing her next words carefully, weighing how much ground she was willing to give up. That doesn't make sense," she said, but the conviction was already leaking out of it, even as she said it. "You're his mother," she said finally, quiet. "Aren't you?" "You knew his real name," I said. "Not everything," she said quickly, too quickly. "I didn't know about you specifically, didn't know he still had a mother out there thinking he was living some regular life. He told me his real name was Renard, a long time ago, early on. Said he'd left it behind because of things that happened to him, things he wasn't ready to talk about. I didn't push him on it. I loved him. You don't interrogate somebody you love out of the parts of themselves they're still healing from." "Larissa," I said, keeping my voice even, "did you know he wasn't actually an orphan?" "I knew there was more to it than what he told my parents," she said, slower now. "I didn't know the specifics. I didn't ask, if I'm being honest. Some part of me didn't want to know. I wanted the man in front of me to be real, even if the story behind him wasn't." "And the paperwork," I said. "The power of attorney, the refinance. Did you know what those really were?" "He said it would help us," she said, her voice cracking, the practiced calm slipping for the first time. "Start our life together without so much weight on our backs." I didn't think of it as stealing from my own parents. I swear to you, I didn't let myself think of it that way. "But some part of you knew," I said quietly. "Or you wouldn't be calling me right now, sensing something's wrong before anybody told you a single fact." She didn't answer that directly, and I understood, standing there on that porch, that her silence these last months hadn't been ignorance. It had been a choice, made over and over. Every day she decided not to ask the questions sitting right in front of her. "I love him," she said, small now, almost pleading. "Whatever he's done, I love the man I know." "That may be true," I said. "But loving somebody doesn't undo what letting him operate has cost your own mother and father." She was quiet a long moment, and when she spoke again, there was something new in her voice. Not defiance, but the particular fear of a woman standing at a fork she hadn't expected to face today. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this," she said. "But I need to talk to him before Friday, Charmaine. I can't just let him walk into something without knowing what's waiting." The porch went cold around me, despite the Georgia heat. "Larissa," I said carefully, "if you warn him, you're not protecting him. You're helping him disappear." She didn't answer that. The line went quiet, and then softly, she hung up. Friday came in gray and humid, the kind of morning that sits heavy on your chest before anything's even happened yet. The title company's office was small and unremarkable, the sort of place people walk in and out of every day without a second thought. A conference room, a long table, a closing agent with a stack of documents thick enough to make anybody's hand cramp before they've signed a fifth of it. I sat in the corner, introduced simply as a family friend, the way Henrietta had arranged it. Lucius and Thelma sat where they were expected to sit, calm on the outside in a way that must have cost them everything they had left. Henrietta sat beside them, folder in her lap, still as a held breath. Renard walked in 11 minutes past the hour, and something in my chest cracked clean down the middle at the sight of him. My son, dressed sharp, smiling easy, carrying himself like a man who believed every door in front of him was already open. He didn't see me at first. He was too busy shaking the closing agent's hand, too busy being Desmond Yates, warm and confident, a man walking into a room he thought he already owned. Then his eyes found the corner where I sat, and I watched his whole face change in real time. The practiced warmth draining out of it, replaced by something raw and unguarded that I hadn't seen on him since he was a boy, caught in a lie too big to shrink back down. "Ma," he said, and the word came out strange in that room, foreign, like it belonged to a different man than the one everyone else there knew. "Sit down, Renard," I said quietly. "Or Desmond, whichever one of you is planning on signing anything today." The closing agent looked between us, confused, sensing something shifting beneath a transaction she'd expected to be routine. Before Henrietta could even open her folder, the agent excused herself and stepped out, murmuring something about needing a supervisor present before proceeding any further. A reflex, I'd learn later, that any experienced closing agent is trained to have the moment a room stops feeling routine. Henrietta stood, calm and unhurried, and set her folder on the table anyway. "My name is Henrietta Odom. I represent the Jernigans. Before this closing proceeds, there are some documents I'd like everyone in this room to see." She laid it out plainly. The death certificate for the real Desmond Andre Yates. The duplicate birth certificate, filed in a different county 8 months later. The power of attorney, obtained under false pretenses from 2 people who believed they were signing with a man who didn't exist. Renard didn't move. He sat very still, watching the papers spread across the table like a man watching his own life get repossessed, piece by piece. "There's nothing to explain," Lucius said, his voice steady now. None of yesterday's shock left in it. "We just want to know who exactly has been sitting at our table for the last 3 years. Renard's jaw worked, and for a long moment I thought he might still try to talk his way out of it. But something in his shoulders gave, instead, dropped, and the man sitting across from us stopped performing entirely. "His name really was Desmond," Renard said quietly. "I didn't invent him out of nothing. I found a man nobody was looking for anymore, and I became him because it was easier than being myself. This isn't the first time," Henrietta said. It wasn't a question. Renard looked at her, something flickering behind his eyes. "No," he said, "it isn't." The room went dead quiet. 4 people staring at a man none of us had ever fully known, waiting for whatever came next. The closing agent had quietly excused herself the moment Henrietta laid out the documents, and by the time she came back, she brought the lender's closing supervisor with her, a man whose face had gone the careful blank of someone who understood, without being told twice, that no funds would be dispersed out of that office today. "There won't be a closing," Henrietta said simply. "This transaction is void, and I'll be following up in writing within the hour." Lucius nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed on Renard the entire time, like a man still trying to reconcile the stranger in front of him with 3 years of Sunday dinners. "You said this wasn't the first time," Lucius said. "I want to know what you mean by that." Renard didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its earlier polish, stripped down to something flatter, more tired. "Before Desmond, there was somebody else. Different city. Different family. It didn't go this far. I left before it got to paperwork. Left or got caught? Henrietta asked. He didn't answer that, and the silence told us plenty. Lucius stood, walked a few steps away, and made a phone call right there in the office, not raising his voice, not performing anger for anybody's benefit, just steady and clear, the way a man sounds when he's already decided something and is only handling the details now. He was calling Detective Reeves, the one Henrietta had already briefed days earlier, back when we first found the death record, precisely so that if the evidence held up, there'd be no delay waiting on someone to catch up to what we already knew. Within the hour, we were sitting in a small side office answering questions for Reeves, calm and thorough, writing down dates and documents while Renard sat across the building in another room, waiting for whatever came next. Henrietta walked us through it in plain language. The power of attorney would be formally revoked that same day. The refinance application withdrawn before any funds moved. And the death certificate and duplicate birth certificate would go straight into a federal identity theft case that, Reeves said, might connect to more than just what happened in that living room in Cascade Heights. If there was someone before us, Reeves said, there may be records we can trace, people he left behind who never got answers. I sat with that thought a long time after we left the office. My son hadn't just built one life on top of a dead man's paperwork. He might have built more than one in more than one city, leaving pieces of himself and pieces of other people's grief scattered behind him like something he never had to clean up. Thelma hugged me before we parted ways that evening, tight and unexpected. The kind of hug that comes from two women who'd survived the same storm from opposite ends of it. We didn't lose everything, she said quietly. Thanks to you walking up our porch steps. I nodded, because I didn't trust my voice yet to say anything back. That night, alone in a motel room off the interstate, I finally let myself sit with the question I'd been outrunning since I'd knocked on that door in Cascade Heights. Renard was still my son. Whatever else he'd built, whatever names he'd worn, whatever families he'd left holding the pieces, I'd carried him, raised him, loved him plain and whole, before he'd learned how to be anybody else. But loving him and knowing him, I was beginning to understand, might not be the same thing anymore. I picked up my phone, scrolled to his name, and sat there a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen, trying to decide what kind of mother I was going to choose to be now that I finally knew exactly who I'd raised. 6 weeks passed before I could say Renard's name out loud without my voice catching on it. The charges moved forward the way Henrietta said they would. Identity theft, fraud. The power of attorney unwound so cleanly it was like it had never existed at all. The refinance never disbursed a single dollar. Lucius and Thelma kept their home, kept their savings, kept the life they'd built over 30 careful years, untouched by the hands that had tried to quietly empty it out from underneath them. The wedding, of course, never happened. Larissa called off the engagement 2 days after that closing. Though I heard through Thelma, it took her longer to grieve the man she thought she'd known than it took her to end things with the one who actually existed. I understood that better than most people could. Grieving a lie takes its own kind of time, separate from whatever comes after it. I visited Renard once in the weeks before his court date, because whatever he'd done, I'd carried him inside my body before I ever carried him anywhere else. And some threads don't cut clean no matter how much they deserve to. He looked smaller across that table than I'd ever seen him, stripped down to just himself for maybe the first time since he was a boy telling his class about a pool we never had. I didn't know how to be enough, he told me, as just Renard. So I found somebody nobody wanted anymore, and I used him to become somebody I thought people would. You were always enough, I told him, and meant it. even sitting across from everything he'd done. You just never believed me when I said it. I didn't offer him forgiveness that day. I wasn't ready to hand that over yet. And some things shouldn't be given before they're honestly felt. But I offered him truth, which was more than he'd offered anybody in years. And I think, for just a moment, it landed somewhere real in him. Thelma calls me most Sundays now. We talk about nothing important most of the time. Her garden, my porch, a recipe she's trying to get right. But underneath the small talk sits something neither of us says out loud. Two mothers who walked into the same storm from opposite ends of it, and came out the other side still standing, still whole, because neither of us looked away from what we found. Lucius sends me a card every year on the anniversary of that Friday, the one that never became a closing. Just a few lines. Always the same sentiment, dressed in different words. Thank you for walking up our porch steps. I think about that a lot these days, how close it came to going the other way. How easy it would have been to accept the excuse my son gave me, to stay comfortable in not knowing, to let, they're too old, they won't be at the wedding, sit quiet and unquestioned, the way so many small lies had before it. But I raised that boy to believe a mother's love means paying attention, even when what you find breaks something inside you. Especially then. I didn't lose my son that day in Atlanta. I lost the version of him I'd let myself believe in, the one who never needed watching closely. What I found instead was harder, sadder, and truer. And it turns out, truer was worth every mile of that bus ride.